going to go ahead and get started. This is Jen Dable.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Tim, and everybody here in Janesville. My name is Jen Dable, and I'm one of the preservation architects at the Wisconsin Historical Society. There are two of us, and we split the state in half. And you are lucky enough to have me review Janesville. I always like to say that I'm the nice one, so that's good. I'm also not going to necessarily stand right here. Being 5 feet tall, I'm afraid to stand behind things because I don't think people can see me. So I'm going to stand out here if that's okay. So I have been with the Wisconsin Historical Society for 9 years this month. And in that time, I have reviewed tax credit projects across the state, from Superior down to Racine, Green Bay to La Crosse, everywhere. And I review both homeowner and commercial or income producing tax credit projects. And Tim asked me to come tonight to speak about both programs. I just want to get kind of a feel of the room. How many people here are interested in learning more about the homeowner tax credits program? Okay. And anybody here own a commercial building or? Okay, great. So we have both. Wonderful. I'd just like to know who I'm speaking to. Not that not everything is interesting. It's all good stuff. But I also wanted just to mention that feel free to raise your hand at any time for a question, because sometimes it's easier in the moment to ask a question than wait until the end. But of course, if you don't think of something until the end, I can certainly answer questions then as well. Any questions before I get started? Okay. I do like to put a disclaimer. I did receive my architecture degree from the University of Minnesota, so I am a Gopher fan, but I think we can all still be friends. Okay. All right, well, let's get started. As I mentioned, the Wisconsin Historical Society, we administer two tax credit programs. The first one is for homeowners. So if you're an owner of a house that's listed in the state and national register of historic places, and that could be individually, or it could be listed as contributing to a historic district. And I know Janesville has quite a few historic districts. How many? 13 historic districts, thank you. So what that tells me is the potential is very large for lots of tax credit applications to come from Janesville. And I can tell you right now, we don't see a whole lot. So this should be the start of something really wonderful. You guys can go out and start spreading the word about the tax credit program. So the homeowners program in the state of Wisconsin began in 1992. And it's a 25% income tax credit for the eligible work that you do to your historic house. And I can tell you, last year, we approved about $10.5 million worth of work across the state of Wisconsin. And that was about 350 applications that Mark and I reviewed. So it's a great program. I think that there are cities that take advantage of it more than others. Right now, a majority of our applications are from Madison and Milwaukee. Now, I understand that there are a lot of historic buildings in Madison and Milwaukee, but I think that Janesville, Beloit, Racine, you guys could really give them a run for their money. So let's work on that a little bit. Okay, there are minimum qualifications. This is always a big question, and people say, 25%, that sounds great, but what do I have to do? First of all, your building has to be listed on the state or national register. Oh, this is a good point. Let's say you live in an old house, and you say it's not listed, but I feel like maybe it should be. There is definitely a way to ask us, because even if your building is not listed, and if our office, we're the State Historic Preservation Office, if we review current photos of your house and any information, and we say, wow, this is definitely eligible, you can take advantage of the tax credit program without actually getting your house listed. And we do have people across the state that have done that. Simply because I think some people just assume it's 2019 and any building that's eligible for listing is listed. Not true. because it's not our office. We do not have time or resources to go across the state and nominate everything that should be nominated. That would be wonderful if we could. So certainly keep that in mind as well. Even if you're not in a district, you can certainly ask us. Okay, so each application needs to have a minimum of $10,000 of eligible work, a maximum of $40,000 of eligible work. And that's just how the state statutes were written back in 1992. I can't explain why it was written this way. That's just how it was written. However, the state statutes were silent on the number of applications a homeowner could submit either at one time or consecutively, which means that we have had homeowners submit 2, 3, the highest amount right now is 32 applications at one time, okay? And that's completely legal and appropriate. And that way you can maximize the tax credits on your house, the work that you're doing. The other thing, I know I don't have enough money to be able to submit 32 applications at one time, but let's say this year you're replacing a furnace in your house and you want to submit an application. Great, you can do that. And then next year you say, oh, man, my roof is leaking, I need to replace my roof. You can submit another application. So there's no limit on the number of applications you can submit over time as well as at one time. So that's an important thing to remember. Lastly, all work needs to meet the Secretary of Interior standards. And that is something that we'll talk about at the end after I talk about commercial and homeowner. But just as a curious, how many people have heard of the Secretary of Interior standards? Tim? Okay, so maybe half. I could talk all night about the standards, but I don't think that you guys would be as interested in it as I am, but we'll certainly discuss that. But that was an important part of the state statutes when this income tax credit program was written into law. They said, you know what, this is an incentive for homeowners across Wisconsin to properly maintain and retain a historic house. So we do look at the work that you're going to do. Okay, next very important question is what's eligible for the tax credits? For the homeowners program, and this is where it's going to kind of get confusing because the homeowners program is quite different than the commercial program. All of this information is on our website, wisconsinhistory.org/tax credits. It's all there, but I just wanted to point out that there's a big difference. So for homeowners, your eligible expenses are really going to be anything to do with the exterior of your house itself. So if you think about painting, your roof, your chimney, windows, that sort of thing. On the interior, the eligible work is going to be anything associated with your mechanical, electrical, plumbing, or structural system. Okay? So, for example, refinishing wood floors is not going to be eligible. Even wood floors are a very important part of our historic homes. It's just not an eligible expense. Okay. I'm going fast, so just remind me to slow down. I've done this talk so many times. I could be sleeping up here and giving the talk, but so just wave your hand if I'm going too fast. Ineligible costs, for example, refinishing your wood floors. If you do an addition onto your house, that addition cost is not going to be eligible. Refinishing bathrooms and kitchens, so all the cabinetry and the finishes and painting, none of that's going to be eligible. Insulation, that's another one. And I know how important insulation is for our historic buildings, but it's not an eligible expense. In 1992, that was not thought of as necessary. So, and if you have questions, I think it's pretty common, and I have a stack of my business cards over on the table here, and I also have brochures for the homeowners and the commercial tax credit programs. Honestly, call me or email me if you have any questions, if you're filling out the application, because it is a lot, and I often say that if I can figure out the application, anybody can, which is true, but don't hesitate to call. That's why I'm here. Okay, so the application process itself. The other thing I hear is, yeah, this sounds great, but it's going to take you 6 months to review my application. Not true. We have it down to about a week right now. And so even with, right now, it's our busiest time of the year, because this is the time when everybody wants to paint their houses and put new roofs on and everything. But right now, it's about a week. So we can turn it around from the time we get it. I'll mail it back out to you. Now, the U.S. Postal Service can be slow. So there have been times when I've received phone calls and they said, Jen, when did you mail out my letter? I don't have it. Friday? I don't know why you don't have it. So we have to take that into consideration. But with your applications, and I just brought 10 copies just in case anybody here, I understand some folks don't like computers as much and downloading, or they don't have printers. So I brought 10 copies of the application. And really, it's quite simple. There's a part 1 and a part 2. And the part 1 really is just the information about your house, the address, your owner's information. And the part 1, the most important part of this, is it's asking you, are you individually listed? Is your house individually listed? Is it in a historic district? Or is this a preliminary certification? That one where I was saying, well, you're not listed yet, but you think your house is definitely eligible. Then you'd mark that. So we need this first page of the part 1. And the part 2, the first page of the part 2, looks very similar as far as the owner's information. But the second page, this is the important part. It is asking you, and these are new, we've revised these recently, but we have all the eligible expenses on the top and ineligible on the bottom. So we've tried to make it kind of dummy-proof for you. So you'd mark, okay, we're going to do the chimney and the electrical, and you're going to put your estimated cost and total it at the bottom. And don't worry, if you try to slip in ineligible up there, I'll check it off and move it down to ineligible. Or vice versa. I've had people put eligible work down here and we'll move it up. And that's really it. And then the last thing we need from you is a current photo of all 4 sides of your house. Now, there's a method to our madness. There are people that submit applications every year, and they'll say, Jen, I submitted photos last year, and it was for my electrical. This year, I'm submitting an application for mechanical. My house still looks the same. Why on earth do you need more photos? Well, one, it's the process, right? We know the government process. But there's a very important reason. We have Leah in our office, and Leah's a photo manager. And so what she does is any photo that comes into the State Historic Preservation Office gets scanned and uploaded to our inventory. We have an inventory of buildings across the state of Wisconsin, whether they're listed or not. And this inventory goes back. So probably the earliest photos we have are probably 1973. And so when we get photos from you guys of your house, of how it looked in 2016 or in 2020, those photos get loaded and they're in the inventory and they'll be there forever. So in 50 years, somebody can say, what did my house look like in 2016? Oh, look, there's a picture. So we want to be kind of forward thinking about what we're doing today, because you guys are the caretakers for your house today or your building, but it's going to be here a lot longer. So that's the reason why we have it. And it's great for research purposes. It's great for restoration or rehabilitation. So all of those things, so you just think you're really helping out the future owners of your building. Okay, so photos of all 4 sides. We're going to describe our planned work, our project. Like I said, we can review it in about a week. The last thing is that once the work is all done, and you're going to either ask for a 2-year or a 5-year to do the work. I understand $10,000 is a lot of money, and sometimes you don't have that to do all the work in 2 years. You can ask for a 5-year phase plan. If you ask for the 5-year phase plan and you get it done in 2 years, there's no penalty. You can close it out. But when the work is all done, there's one last form, and it's not part of this packet, but once we review your application, we'll mail you the Part 3 form, and it's on hot pink paper. Nobody's wearing hot pink tonight. It's on fluorescent pink paper, and we do that so you can't miss it. And all your papers at home, that hot pink Part 3 form you're gonna see. So when the work is all done, you're gonna fill out that one form and then take a new set of photos of all 4 sides of your house. Even if the only thing you did was electrical and your house didn't change, we still need a current photo of all 4 sides. And that's it. I mean, it's a pretty easy program. I think it's a very important program, but it's pretty easy. This is a house in Mineral Point, and it's actually a farmstead. This is a farmhouse. And the owner has done several homeowner applications. The important thing to remember too with the homeowners is that if you live in a farmstead and it's not income producing, you live in the farmhouse and you have the barn, you use the barn just as a garage, any of the eligible work you do to the barn is also going to be eligible. Okay? If you have a carriage house that was built at the same time as your house, if you have a garage that was built at the same time as your house, the roof, the painting, the pointing, all the same kind of thing is going to be eligible on those contributing buildings as well. Anyway, this is a farmstead in Mineral Point, and I like to show this before and after picture. The before, of course, is on the top, the after is on the bottom. But what I like about this is this program is not meant to be an extreme makeover kind of thing where you can't recognize the house after you do this work, because we want you to retain the identity and the integrity of that historic resource. So as you can see here, they did some exterior painting, they did some shutters, they put a new roof on, maybe some pointing of the stone, but really, they buttoned it all up for the next 50 years, right? That's what we like to see. I've kind of already mentioned this, but this is just a list of some of the common projects we see. Mark and I laugh. Mark, the other architect, he sits 5 feet from me. And we love when we get these easy projects. It's a furnace or a boiler replacement, or they're painting their house. It's so easy. There's no assigned conditions, there's nothing. But we'll take any application, even the hard ones. We just might need another Diet Coke before we dive into those more difficult ones. But these are some of the common projects. I would like to take a moment here. I'm going to talk more about the identity and integrity of a historic building when we talk about the standards later. But windows. Windows is probably the most common question I get, and one of the most common applications, and one we cannot always approve. Historic windows, original wood windows, are character-defining features to your historic building. And we do not approve replacement windows for energy reasons, simply because this is a historic preservation tax credit program. And because, even though Marvin and Pella don't want you to know this, you can put on a quality aluminum storm window and get the same energy efficiency with your original wood window and that storm window as you do for those replacement windows. So putting those two things together, we cannot approve replacement windows for so-called energy reasons. And I think, looking at this building, the original windows are still here. I believe there's storms. Yep. There's storms here, and it really does truly make a big difference. So I could stand up here all night and talk about windows too, but I won't. I'll keep going. You can have me back another time. We'll talk about windows.
I have a question.
Yes.
Exterior painting is on there. Do you have any restrictions with color?
No, we don't care. And I hate to say we don't care. We care about you and your project, but we do not care what color you paint it. That's probably myth number 747, right?
I'll add, the Historic Commission has no authority over that either in the historic overlay of Janesville. So
Yeah,
that
that's
is
good to
a
know.
misconception. A lot of people call and say, I want to paint, here's my colors.
Yeah.
That's great. I mean,
Yeah.
whatever you want is fine.
Right.
But
Right.
Would you help choose a color that would be authentic if I didn't know what color? If I wanted a suggestion that would be pertinent to...
Are you asking me or Tim?
Tim.
Tim.
Haha,
I can point you to some resources for that,
okay.
but not as Tim Moss.
No, not you, but you can
Janesville
help
Historic Commission or something like that.
find me some.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it really, I mean, I think this so much about is education. And the reason is that our office, the State Historic Preservation Office, and the National Park Service looks at exterior paint colors as really temporary. If you think about it, buildings in Wisconsin are maybe 100, 150 years old. How many times have they been painted in their lifetime, right? Every 7 to 20 years, they've been painted. And there's never, ever been well, if you have a colonial revival, it must be this color. Never. It's always been based on the owner at the time, their personal preference. And so that's why we collectively say it's a temporary finish. Okay? So it's good to know. Yeah.
I've already updated the electricals. The first and only thing, it's amazing the house has been done
Yes.
already.
Yes.
Now, they've been paid, so what if is that hindsight now, or is it something I can still?
No, unfortunately, you can't apply for that. The state statutes were very clear about that. They said that all work needs to be reviewed and approved by the State Historic Preservation Office before you start the work. So that's pretty cut and dry. Yeah.
Is exterior painted? What if you wanted new siding?
That falls under a similar category as windows, is that original wood siding is most likely old growth lumber, and that's hard stuff. It's really dense stuff. And if you take that off and put new wood siding on today, that new wood siding is not going to last nearly as long. Or if you want to put fiber cement board siding on because people say it looks the same, it doesn't. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about the integrity of a historic building. Okay. So no, we want you to retain the original wood siding and repair it. And if, sometimes we have water issues, if there's a couple boards at the bottom that are rotten, take those couple boards off and replace them with wood and repaint it. That really retains the most of it.
Building off that question, what if the project is removal of vinyl and aluminum siding to go back to?
Then you get a gold star. We don't give too many of those out, but yes, that's definitely all eligible. Yep, removing. And I was just telling the story. I did that to my house in St. Paul, Minnesota. I bought a house with metal siding. I took it all off, sanded and repainted the wood siding underneath. It was wonderful. So yes, we'll definitely give you credits for that. Okay?
Even though with aluminum?
If you remove the aluminum siding, yes.
I mean, we've been down in Beloit,
Yeah.
and Beloit had some aluminum sided houses with a small aluminum and everything, and they made wide boards and everything, and they accepted that down there in their historical district.
Oh, no, we're not going to allow you to install metal siding.
Okay.
No, no. I'm sorry, I thought we were still talking about removing it. No, we wouldn't allow you to install metal or vinyl or anything like that. Okay. Any other questions on homeowners before I move on to commercial? We can come back, because when we talk about commercial, you might have more questions for the homeowners program. So, state of Wisconsin, if you have a commercial building or an income producing, so sometimes it's a residential rental property that falls under this program, there's a 20% state income tax credit and an additional 20% from the federal government. Just last year, the state of Wisconsin put a cap on the amount of credit you can get per parcel. And that cap is a $3.5 million cap per parcel. And we've had a lot of discussion about the legal definition of parcel over the past year, if you can imagine. But $3.5 million cap is equal to about a $17 million project. So if you have an income producing building and you're going to put $17 million into it or less, you will get the full 20% credit. Yes?
Is there a date to consider it historical? Like, could you have a mid-century house census?
Yeah, that is a great question. I love that question. 50 years is just the like ballpark number. So we say buildings that were constructed in 1969 may be eligible. Now, the age is only one thing that we look at. We look at the architecture, we look at the history of the building. So there's other things we take into consideration. But 1969 is a good starting point. So 50 years. And I think that shocks some people. I think some people think that historic architecture ended in 1940. I don't know. I get that from some people. I have an aunt and uncle that say, there's no historic buildings built after 1940. Yes, there are. They're everywhere. So I think it's just kind of about us reframing our mindset. All right. So just like with homeowners, this, for the commercial, I'm going to call it commercial tax credits, the building must be listed on the state or national register. And unlike the homeowners, the building actually has to be listed. Remember I said for homeowners, we could just say it's eligible and you can go for it. For these tax credits, the building actually has to be listed. Now, it's not to say that if you own a building in Janesville, commercial building, and you send in the information and we can take a look at it and we say, oh, this is definitely eligible. You can start that process of getting the nomination written and all that at the same time that you start your tax credit application. So you don't have to wait, because it'll take about a year to get that building listed on the state and national register. That's a separate process, but you can kind of do both of the processes at the same time. I listed Peggy Berrigan's name here on the lower right. She's our National Register Coordinator. And so if you had any questions about a building that you're thinking, oh, it might be eligible, or if you have any questions about the actual process of nominating a building, you can certainly call Peggy in our office. The second thing, you know, with the homeowners, I said the applications have to be between $10,000 and $40,000. This is very different for commercial. And this kind of hits at, like, I'm an architect and I don't like math very much. This is really reaching for me here, but I'm going to explain this. So for the federal income tax credit, your project costs need to be equal to or greater than your adjusted base value for the building. And for the IRS purposes, the adjusted base value is what you purchased the building for, minus the value of the land at the time of purchase, plus any improvements you've made to the building, minus depreciation. Okay? And that's a lot, but there's a reason for this, is that you may or may not know the State Historic Preservation Offices started as a result of the Preservation Act of 1966, right? That's what started this whole thing, because our government was saying, we need to stop demolishing whole swaths of our cities. Okay, Preservation Act of 1966. By 1974, the federal government wasn't seeing a whole lot of slowing down of demolition. And they said, wait a second, we started the National Register, we have state historic preservation offices, why are we still demolishing? Oh, because owners need some money. They need some financial incentive to keep these buildings and reuse them. And so that's when this 20% federal tax credit came into effect, was the mid-70s. And they said, okay, we want you, instead of demolishing these buildings, these factories or whatever else that aren't being used anymore, let's find new uses for it. And if you do, we're going to give you this. But they weren't going to do it for just small, fix your roof kind of projects. They wanted you to put serious money into this building. And that's how we received or got this equation for the adjusted base value. Okay? Now I can tell you, again, I'm an architect, not an accountant, but after talking with my accountant friends, do I have any accountants in the room? No, okay. What I've learned from them is that if you own a commercial building for at least 15 years, your depreciation is probably down to 0. So I have talked with commercial building owners across the state, and they've said, Jen, I can apply, and all I'm doing is replacing my roof, but I've owned the building since 1961. So the depreciation is 0. fantastic, then apply, right? On the other hand, there's other situations where owners just purchased the building, but the city was trying to get rid of it because they didn't want to pay to have it demolished. So they said, somebody buy this building, for $1. Guess what? Their adjusted base value, they can go do whatever they want then and apply for the tax credits. So there's many situations. Let's move to the state of Wisconsin, 20%. Starting in 1992, the state of Wisconsin had a 5% income tax credit in addition to this 20% federal. So from 1992 until 2013, it was 5%. So 25%, what we saw is that helped the larger projects in Fox River Valley, Green Bay, Milwaukee, maybe Madison, the larger projects where they can charge higher rents, but it wasn't helping so much the small commercial, two-story commercial buildings that you'll see later. In 2013, there was a large push to get that credit upped. And really what it was a competition. Because my boss at the time, Jim Drager, said, Jen, I want you to call the other states in the country and see what kind of tax credit they have to go with the 20% federal. And what I found out is not all states have income taxes. That's one thing I learned. The other thing I learned is Wisconsin was in the bottom 2 for the ones that did have this income tax. We were with West Virginia at the bottom with 5%. Guess what? Neighboring states like Minnesota had 20%. So when we brought that to our legislators and we said there are developers that are based in Wisconsin that will not do tax credit projects in Wisconsin because they can go to Minnesota, invest their money, and get 20% versus 5% here. It's all about the money, again. So in January 1 of 2014, the state of Wisconsin enacted 20% state credit to match the federal. And I can tell you that Mark and I, while we really like that, the number of applications have tripled. So before 2014, we maybe had 12 or 13 federal projects across the state. Now we're averaging about 45 a year. And the even better thing, I think, is that it's in communities like Janesville, La Crosse. La Crosse is insane. I don't know where they're finding all these buildings. La Crosse, Superior, Racine, Beloit. So that's what's so nice about it, because small business owners that have their businesses in these historic buildings now can say, hey, if I get 40% back, that's great. And state of Wisconsin in 2013, when they were drafting this legislation, they said, do you like this whole adjusted base value? And we said, no. Just give it a dollar amount. So state of Wisconsin said $50,000. That's all your project has to be. They also decoupled it from the federal, which means the gentleman I was referring to in Chippewa Falls that owned the building since 1961 and all he was doing was the roof, he met the requirements for the federal, but he did not meet the state because his project was not $50,000, okay? So he qualified for the 20% federal. So that happens in both respects. Sometimes people don't spend enough to meet that adjusted base value, but they're spending more than $50,000, so they'll get the state 20%. So that's an important thing to remember too with your projects. No matter what kind of work you're going to be doing, I'm sure we can fit you into at least one of these categories. Yeah?
What if there isn't a purchase price?
That is such a great question. I have no idea. You're saying you inherited it or something? Yeah. That is when I'm going to say you should talk to a tax professional. I can give you Craig Quammen's name and number. Craig Quammen is with the Department of Revenue, and he's a staff specialist for tax credits, and he's fantastic, and I can give you his number. It's 608-266-7177. I've said that so many times. It's not even tattooed on my arm. I just know his phone number. But he's fantastic. So if you have any tax credit questions, something like that, you can certainly call Craig and ask him. What's that? Sure, it's 608-266-7177.
Craig.
Quammen. His last name is spelled K-V, as in Victor, A-M-M-E-N. The V is silent, Quammen. Okay, so again, unlike homeowners, this program is different. Anything to do with the building itself, inside or outside, is eligible for these commercial credits. Anything, with the exception of movable equipment, such as refrigerators, dishwashers, furniture. So refinishing wood floors, painting, new light, anything you do to the building. Yes?
What about, renovating the building, ADA?
Yes. Anything. Yep. If you have a project and you hire an architect or an engineer, those guys are expensive. Just kidding. Those fees are eligible for the tax credits. So you put that in your expenses. If you hire a consultant to write your National Register nomination, they're going to charge you $2,000, $3,000, $5,000. That's eligible for the tax credits. So you put all of that in your application and you're going to get 40% back. The work that's not eligible is site work, landscaping, parking lots, retaining walls, fences, that kind of thing is not eligible, as is movable equipment and new construction. I mentioned that before. So in addition, in this International Harvester building in Madison, they did a small elevator addition on the back. And so they received tax credits for the historic portion, but the cost of that elevator addition was not eligible for the credits. Okay. 2018, we had new legislation. And this legislation actually started at the federal level, which was passed in December of 2017 as part of the Tax Reform Act. And the state of Wisconsin liked what they did, so they adopted it. Essentially, with the commercial tax credits, when the project, you're not able to claim it until the project's all done and your Part 3 is signed by us and the National Park Service. And then you can only claim 1/5 of the credit for each, 1/5 of the credit per year for 5 years. Okay? And that's the same at federal and state level. This is an important time, I can tell you. The federal credits are not transferable. You can't sell the federal credits, but you can sell the state credits. And so sometimes we have small business owners that really like that idea. Because they're like, I'm never going to be able to use all these tax credits, which you have 15 years, by the way, to use them all. But you can sell the state credits. And since this legislation, those credits are worth about 84, 86 cents on the dollar. Okay? Oh, and purchasers, so once you purchase the credit, they're not required. They're not, if you purchase my credits, you can use them however you want. You don't have to do it 1/5 per year for 5 years. Okay? So that's new legislation as of last year. We've seen what this did, though, is it lowered the value of the credit. Before this legislation, the state credits were worth about 96 cents on the dollar because they could claim them all at one time after the project was done. Now that they're split over 5 years, the value has gone down just a little bit. Okay, so application process. With commercial buildings, there may be some design work and whatnot. That's all with you, with your owner, and with the architects and engineers. Once we receive your application, our office, it could take up to 30 days, but I can say normally with me it's about 2 weeks. Then, if you're applying for state and federal, we're going to send one copy to the National Park Service. And the National Park Service right now has 12 reviewers for all 50 states. And our reviewer is Liz Petrella. So I'll send one set to Liz, and she has Wisconsin, New Jersey, Maryland, North Dakota, and South Dakota. So Liz will review your application, and she'll take all 30 days. She gets 30 days, and she uses all 30 days. They need like double the number of reviewers that they have. There is no review fee at the state level for these commercial projects, but there is at the National Park Service level, and you can see the matrix for that. What happens is that once they receive a Part 2 application, their front office will send you an email, or whoever the owner is, an email and ask you to go to pay.gov to pay a certain percentage of your fee at the time of Part 2 review. This is kind of the fun part, because we kind of got thick into the numbers there for a second. I like to show you just a few examples of tax credit projects that have happened in the past 9 years when I've been here, just so you can kind of see what's happening, who's doing these. This was a building in Monroe, and you can see on the picture on the left. Do you see which building this is? I'm sorry, it's this one with this terrible permastone on the first floor. I'm sorry, on that side. I'm not used to 2 screens, Tim. This is very high tech. It's the building with the permastone on the first floor, and then there's a blow up on the right. That owner called me and said, Jen, I want to do a tax credit project. Fantastic. So I went and visited the site, which is standard protocol. If you guys call me, not for homeowners, but for commercial buildings, I'll come and visit you, and we'll walk through the building. And he really wanted to restore the facade, mostly. He did do interior work. But you can see the after, what happened. He removed the permastone. Unfortunately, the original storefront was gone. I can tell you about half the time, portions of the original storefront are still there, simply because it's cheaper and easier just to cover up than remove it and infill it. So I love when that happens, when some of that original storefront is there. This one was all gone, which is fine, because in the other, on this one too, you can see this is 1/3 of a block building. So he could take cues from the other 2 buildings that were constructed at the same time, and he was able to restore the storefront. Even on the alley side, he could put windows back in. Alleys, you have a little bit more freedom as to get away with electrical equipment or whatnot. But this is a pretty average, normal project. And I get these projects all across the state. La Crosse has a lot of these. But you can see the QRE is qualified rehabilitation expenditures, so that's his eligible expenses. So it was $220,000, and he received $44,000 in state credits and $44,000 in federal credits. So, like I said, I've seen smaller projects, and we review projects up to $40 million, but this is pretty average. The next one, I always have to say, I am not getting paid by Bob's Bitchin' Barbecue, but their barbecue is so good. Have anybody here been there? It's so good. Okay, so Bob and Judy Page of Bob's Bitchin' Barbecue called me and said that they needed to buy a new building. Their business, they needed bigger space. I was like, well, that's a good problem. So they bought this building in the Dodgeville Historic District, and you can see they reopened the original masonry openings on the second floor. The prism glass, the transom glass, was still there. It was hiding behind that, it was awning, and then there was plywood behind it. And Judy and I, when we were out there, she's like, oh, I'm so hoping it's still there. And it was, again, because it's cost more to take it out. And that storefront was original from the 40s, I believe. So she kept that. And there's different iterations of features of a building, and that was a beautiful storefront. So they did a lot of work at the exterior, but also on the interior. When we toured the building, it was a abandoned Ace Hardware, I think. Ace Hardware. And they finished it out for their restaurant. And I was sad because Judy called me last year and she said, Jen, oh, this is one thing. You have to own the building for a period of 5 years from when your project is finished in order to keep all your credits. So it's not meant for flipping. It's the same thing for homeowners. So if you take tax credits, you have to own the building, your house or the commercial building, for 5 years. Judy called me last year and said, Jen, Bob and I want to retire. Can we sell it? And I said, no. I don't care how many years it's been. Anyway, but it's a great project. And let's see, you can see this project was, just over 700,000. So this is a little bit bigger for a two-story downtown commercial building, but you can see 140,000 in credits from the state and federal. And then lastly, this one is one in your neighborhood. This is one of my favorite projects, and I'm not just saying that because I'm in Janesville. They don't have barbecue there, but still a really good project. Not yet, right, yeah.
not yet.
So when the owner of this building called me, and I came and did my site visit, I think he had an architect with him. And he said, Jen, I want to make all of these window openings bigger because he wanted to put residential in there. And that was code for residential. You have to have so much square footage of window. And I said, I'm sorry, that would never ever get approved. Not by our office or by the National Park Service. Simply because the character of this building, part of it, is the size of the windows. And it directly relates to the original use of the building as a tobacco warehouse. So I said, I'm sorry. And you know what? It's true that sometimes at this point in my site visit, owners will say, okay, I guess we're done. Because this program is voluntary. You don't have to go through this. We don't have to approve, unlike Tim over there who, he gets to review projects. You don't have to go through tax credits, and then you don't need to deal with me. So at that point I thought, okay, this guy might just walk away and make all the windows bigger, which is his prerogative. But about 2 months later he calls me, he says, Jen, can you come back out? I have new ideas. I says, yes. So now we know it's office. It's office space. How many have been inside this building? It's beautiful. And this is one of my favorite buildings because when it looked like this, when we first went there, it was at the end of October and it was a haunted house inside. So I was doing a site visit literally through a haunted house. There were no lights and I said, this is the weirdest site visit I've ever done. But I was happy to go back during construction and after. It's not haunted anymore. Yes, sir.
Got a little history of that building, and I hope I have my facts straight.
Yeah.
There was 3 automobiles manufactured in Janesville before GM came here,
Really?
and they were called the Monitor. And I think the Monitor was assembled in that building there, the Green Brothers leak tobacco.
Really?
And then there was a company called the Owen Thomas automobile.
Okay.
And then finally there was another automobile manufacturer here called the Wisco, W-I-S-C-O.
Really?
But they only manufactured or produced these from about 1907 until about 1913.
Okay.
And I haven't been able to find, I don't know if there's any of these automobiles around. I've asked
Wow.
questions and done some research. But, and I found out that at one time, Janesville had about 25 tobacco warehouses. And we're down now to about 2 or 3.
That I can believe, because in my various site visits, Janesville, Evansville, this area, right? This area of the state.
Yeah. Actually, the tobacco people came to Wisconsin. It was Mr. Pomeroy. When you go up to Edgerton, from what I've read, there's a Pomeroy Road named after Mr. and Mrs. Pomeroy.
Really?
That brought tobacco, or really got it started. And I think for a long time, and I don't know if it's true now, but the government regulated how many acres of tobacco you could have. I think you could only have, and again, I don't know if this has changed, but I think for a long time, you could only have about an acre or 2 of tobacco, and that was dictated by the government.
Very interesting. Thank you for that. Look at how much we're learning tonight. Not just about windows. So this project, let's see, I'll show you the numbers. So this project is larger, 3.6 million. So the owner received 720,000 in credits from the state and federal government. And it's fantastic because, again, this building, one of the great things was inside that wood lap siding that was on it, not shiplap. Yeah, siding on the inside. It was amazing. He asked me, he says, Jen, can I insulate this building? I said, well, you can't cover that. That's original fabric. You can't cover that. He said, what if I take it down insulate it and put it all back up. I said, sure. And that's exactly what he did. And I was there during the process, and the contractors, they were numbering each single, and they had these stacks, and they knew exactly where they all went back. It's amazing. And so it's harder to see, but in this photo, if you look back at the back wall, that's that wood. It's just been painted. So much energy and care goes into these projects, and there are a million little details. And it can be a lot if you're not a trained architect or contractor, but that's why we're here to help. And certainly it can answer any questions. Anyway, this was a fun project. All right. Lastly, it's 7 o'clock. Can I have like 10 more minutes? Okay. If that. I'll go quick. The last thing is that both homeowners and commercial buildings have to meet the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. And so I want to quickly go through this. This was a cover of the book, and it was written in the mid-'70s when the federal credits started, because they said, okay, we're going to offer these tax credits, but we want people to know what we think are the general guidelines or the rules by which to follow. So that's when this book was written, and it hasn't changed a whole lot since then. Okay, this is not a standard, but I call it the golden rule. You always, whether it's for your house or for a tobacco warehouse, you want to retain the identity and the integrity of the building. When I say identity, I mean what it looks like. Standing outside, what does that building look like? Integrity is, what are the materials that were used to build that building? Okay? And I have two perfect examples to illustrate this. Does anybody know the house on the left? Black Point, yes, in Lake Geneva, thank you. Black Point looks exactly the same as it did when it was constructed by the Chicago beer baron. And his family could come back today and say, that's our summer cabin, because it hasn't changed a bit. So the identity is the same, and the integrity, meaning the porch rails, the windows, the siding, the floors, the plaster, it's all original, okay? Yay. So that one is perfect for identity and integrity. This one-room schoolhouse on the right, I don't know where this is located, and it doesn't really matter, but it proves a point here, is that this one-room schoolhouse may have identity, meaning the first class of children that went to school there may say, oh, this is where we went to school. However, it has zero integrity, because the Friends group that restored this building replaced the windows, the siding, the roof. They rebuilt the bell tower. On the inside, all the plaster's gone, the wood floors are gone. The only material that's historic in this is the wood wall studs. That's it. So this is no longer a historic building. This is a new building that looks like a historic building that once stood there, okay? And that's the golden rule. I think that if you guys can get this lesson, you have the rest figured out. Because when we go back and talk about windows, why we don't approve replacement windows, it goes back to this. Why we don't approve fiber cement board siding, it goes back to this lesson, okay? All right, so that's, if you got that, the rest of these are all really gonna be easy. Standards number 2 and 5 are talking about preserving character-defining features. Everybody here owns a historic building, house, commercial, whatever. And historic buildings all have one thing in common. They do have character-defining features. They all may be different, but they all have them. And so whatever your building has, we want you to retain it and repair it instead of replacing it. Here are some examples. Lower left is Black Point, the porch again. You don't get more character-defining than that. Does anybody know where the stair is from on the upper right? Villa Louis? Did Tim get that? It doesn't. That doesn't count. Tim can't answer.
I had to wire ears in there.
Yeah, Villa Louis. I mean, that's a great stair, right? That's fantastic. On the lower right, that's a original tin ceiling of a bar in Platteville, and there were 2 ceilings that were hung below this ceiling. So when they called me And they said, we want to do a tax credit project. And I said, well, this ceiling isn't original. And we got on the ladder. This one's not original. We had to keep going. The original one was there. So to keep that, upper left, storefront in Madison, original storefront, you can't recreate that. Why would you want to, right? So when we look at your applications, no matter what program you're applying for, we're going to look for those kinds of things. I always get laughs at this one. This is not in Wisconsin, thankfully. This is in Colorado. And this may have been done as a joke. However, it proves this standard number 3 perfectly. Do not falsify history. So we have a historic, let's say we have a historic ranch house. And it's this beautiful streamlined ranch house. And this is a true story. I was driving by and somebody added Italianate brackets from Menards to that beautiful ranch house. And I said to myself, don't do that. Because that's falsifying history, 1. 2, that beautiful historic ranch house never had Italianate brackets. It's like putting lipstick on a pig, right? Just don't do that. That's what this person was trying to do. Maybe in jest. So when you send in your applications, we're going to look to make sure that you're not adding anything that the historic building never had. Okay? Number 4, sometimes buildings have acquired character-defining features and they've acquired significance. Does anybody know what that mint blue-green material is called on that storefront? Carrara glass or vitrolite glass. It was so popular during the Deco movement where everything was kind of streamlined and modern. It's such cool material, and it was used for a relatively short time in our history. And this example, it's actually in Minnesota, this building's in Minnesota, but the original storefront did not look like that. It was a pretty traditional storefront. But guess what? If these folks were applying for tax credits and they say, okay, we want to tear all that off and recreate the original storefront, we'd probably say no. Because that storefront has acquired significance in and of itself. Okay? Another example on the right, mid-century. We're now seeing mid-century materials and designs that are now have acquired significance. So things like that. This is not as common with buildings, but it's something I like to throw out there for people to know. Yes?
Isn't Wisconsin kind of a hotbed for old antique houses? I mean, my wife and I, since I retired 11 years ago, we've been riding around Wisconsin, 2-lane roads and whatever. So last weekend we were up in Oshkosh. They've got a whole bunch. My son lived in Green Bay. They've got a whole bunch there. I mean, there's antique houses in Wisconsin all over, isn't there?
Yes. Thank you. I didn't even pay him to say that. There are historic buildings and houses all over Wisconsin. And I think that's a great observation to say. I mean, you guys know Janesville so well. This is your home. But honestly, if you drive around, it's fantastic to see. And I think that's a great message and something that I feel like is part of my job is just about education. Going out to communities and educating you guys how important our historic buildings are in our communities. That's what sets us apart. It's not the strip that has the Target and the McDonald's and the Burger King. Those look the same in every town. It's our historic districts and our historic main streets that set Janesville apart from La Crosse, right?
A number of those, you were talking about Lake Geneva.
Yeah.
A number of those houses were built by millionaires
Yes.
from Chicago during
Yes.
the Great Fire. They didn't have any place to stay because their house had burned up.
Right.
So they had the money also. They built their own private railroad from downtown Chicago to Lake Geneva.
Yeah. You're exactly right.
When their houses had been rebuilt in Chicago from the Great Fire, and then they moved back.
Or they used them as their summer cabin.
Yeah.
Standard number 6 is repair before you replace. Again, I mean, sometimes I think this is such an easy lesson, but if you look at the upper left, you see that beautiful stained glass fan light. It's very delicate and intricate. And below it, this is a different building, but somebody took out an original old growth wood window and put in a white vinyl window. That drastically changes the character of that space. And I can tell you vinyl windows don't last as long as old growth historic wood windows do. On the right, you see the pair of green doors, the Italian green doors, that's from that farmhouse in Mineral Point that I showed you earlier. How beautiful and intricate they are versus a standard door that you'd buy at Menards or Home Depot today. So oftentimes people say, well, it's just a door. Well, that door is character defining to that house. And so we would not approve taking that out and putting in a new door. Standard number 7 says do no harm. So not only are we going to look at what you're doing, but it's the materials and how you're doing it. Do I have any masons in the room? No masons. Okay, so we do look at brick and stone pointing very closely. The photo on the lower right, that can happen when you repoint with mortar that's harder than the brick. Because in traditional construction, the mortar was the sacrificial, so that was meant to be softer. So as the brick expanded and contracted, that mortar would move with it. Today, there are masons that say, let's put type S in, because that stuff is so strong, that's never going to deteriorate. It won't, but the brick will. So that's what happens. So we're going to ask that you use soft mortar like type O or N as in Nancy. The other thing that we're going to ask for is usually a test patch of pointing, because not all masons are created equally. Not all masons know how to properly repoint a historic building. Lastly, old versus new. I think another standard misconception is that they're going to say, well, I don't want to apply because they're going to make me make my building look like it did when it was first constructed and we can't do anything new to it. Absolutely not. This is a rehabilitation tax credit program, not a restoration tax credit program. And we understand things like ADA, and we want to update mechanical, electrical, plumbing, get Wi-Fi and all this other good stuff in our buildings. So I often say, it's not what you do, but it's how you do it. It's really key. And so on the upper left, does anybody know that building? It's in Wisconsin, in Menominee. It's a theater. Why am I blanking now?
Harvard University there.
No, it was a municipal theater. Anyway, you can see the addition is on the left. And that addition is a great example of how to put an addition on. It's on the back of the theater. It's not taller than the historic building. It actually has the same materials. The windows are similar, but they don't try to copy. It's very nice. Most importantly, that addition can be removed because the original rear wall is still there. So in 50 years, if they say, we don't need elevators anymore, for whatever reason, they can remove that addition, okay? On the lower left is a photo of a house with a small porch addition. Great. You want a porch? Do you want a family room? Great. It's not what you do, it's how you do it. So we can with that as well. The photos on the right are examples of terrible additions. Neither of those are in Wisconsin, so we can be happy about that. But those are things so we're definitely going to look at the design of your addition, not only its location or materials.
But those wouldn't be covered, right?
No, but we still have to review and approve everything.
Okay.
So that's a great question. So if you had an application, you were doing everything right by the historic building, but you wanted to add that, we still would not approve it, even if that's, you're not going to get credits for that addition, but everything has to meet the standards, not just the eligible work. All right, so the application forms for both programs are on our website, wisconsinhistory.org/tax credits. And this is just a screenshot of that page. We have frequently asked questions, we have contractor standards, we have instructions for you, anything and everything you need to know. And I also wanted you to know I brought business cards. They're over on the table, and there are brochures for the homeowners and for the commercial. And you can take them for yourself, or if you have neighbors that you want to say, hey, this was great, go talk to Jen. you can feel free to take those. And then if anybody wants a printout of the homeowner's applications, I have 10 up here too. Are there any questions? Yes?
I don't want to get it back to the original 1850s because it has a history that's shown up to be fine. So that's okay.
Yeah, the accretion is beautiful. And so that's the important thing too, is when you submit an application, some people say, well, they're going to make me restore this. Nope, we only review the work that you want to do. So if you have a terrible storefront, we're not going to make you take it off and put a new, you can leave it. So we're only going to review what you want to do, the work you want to do. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.